Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for December 4th, 2017. We'll begin with special order calendar items, decision items. Item number 1, 61756BZ, 3120 Albany Crescent, the Bronx.
The applicant states that the Community Board recommended approval on October 27th, but, and apparently the full board was meeting in November, so we need the recommendation, and we don't have that.
Yeah, I'll call them again.
Okay. The applicant provided photos of the fence slatting. That was in the open areas, but really, they need to trim it. It looks like they put the slatting in and they just left it. They're supposed to trim the tops, so they really need to trim that. And I just want to make sure that for our council that we clarify in the resolution that this is for 66 spaces consistent with the previously approved plans, because it never actually stated the space count. Any other comments? In terms of the trim, we could make that a condition of approval. I don't want to hold this up any further. Okay.
Item number 2, 25602BZ, 160 Imlay Street, Brooklyn.
I have to recuse from this one?
Yep.
We received documentations indicating that all the violations have been cured, and that DOB has rescinded the stop work order, so it seems to be in good shape, ready to go. I don't have any issues. Do you have issues?
Okay.
Item number 3, 16407BZ, 280 Marsh Avenue, Staten Island.
Okay, they provided proof of fire department fire alarm and sprinkler inspection of 2015, so I think that's normally what we require.
Continued hearing items. Item number 4, 86685BZ, 2338 Camberling Avenue, the Bronx.
They revised the parking plan to increase the number of parking spaces to 20, but it's not diagonal, it's head-in spaces. I don't have any issues with this one.
They didn't dimension that center drive aisle. If they could just tell me what the square foot, the linear footage is between both sets of parking stalls, that would be great.
Okay, and actually then quickly revise the plans to show the width. Okay.
Item number 5, 7595BZ, 1635 3rd Avenue, Manhattan.
Just 1 second. Okay. Nothing was submitted on this. We were waiting for fire alarm installation. Nothing was submitted.
Oh, yeah, right. They were supposed to submit on Friday, and he didn't.
Yeah.
I know Fred was out of town.
Okay, so we don't know what the status is with this.
New cases, item number 6, 54053BZ, 8717 111th Street, Queens, extension of term.
Okay. We have proof of service of initial application and proof of notice of hearing to officials. We do need the community board recommendation, in particular because they commented on the site in the past. Council should note, though, in the resolution, or our council should note in the resolution that tax lots 125 was eliminated in 1961, so this application pertains only to lot 124. Apparently that's still traveling along. The site looks in reasonably good condition. Surprise. Okay. I'm just curious what others think about whether there should be a gate. Oh, there used to be a gate. It was taken away at some point without any kind of mention in the resolution. The parking lot's just open.
I think this is probably, I mean, when I went on the site visit, it looked in very good condition and it's being well maintained. So I don't know if the gate is going to make any difference, but this is something maybe we can find out from the applicant as to whether they need
a gate.
Yeah.
It's right off of the subway L. It's in a very highly commercial little area. So it's not like it needs a gate to beautify it.
Or to secure it.
Oh, normally we have a little chain or something like that to close them at night. I don't
like
have an
if-
opinion.
Yeah, a chain, something inexpensive like a chain, that's fine, but I would not force them to go through the whole thing of a gate
Right.
because it's going to be lost on the neighborhood.
Right, okay.
Item number 7, 17395BZ, 30 East 85th Street, Manhattan.
Okay. So we have proof of service of initial application and proof of notice of hearing to officials. Community Board recommended approval. We had DOI report on this because this is a change in operator since the original approval, going from a David Barton to an Equinox. I do appreciate that the applicant provided us with the zoning lot description and ownership statement that sets the date of the zoning lot merger in May of 1985. However, the historical zoning maps show that in May 1985, the zoning lot was already split between a C51 and an R8, which had been the case since 1961. So the R8B designation actually didn't change the split lot condition. And therefore, I'm not sure that the 77-11 split lot rules that allow a pre-61 lot to treat that extra 20 feet as if it's part of the zoning lot applies. I may be reading this in a way that's different than the others might read it, or the applicant's counsel might read it, but if you look at the text of the zoning resolution, it applies to pre-61 zoning lots, or where the amendment in the zoning map has a specific effect on that. So in other words, creates the new boundary, right? And that wasn't the case. So I'm not sure that that 20 feet that's in the R8B is allowed to be in the PCE. So putting that out there. I'm just, in addition, so that's a very big hurdle. The David Barton Club at this location did close almost a year ago, and it doesn't look, based on Equinox's website, that it's opened a new facility. So since it's a different operator, normally we ask for notification of upstairs neighbors because this is a residential building, but it hasn't been operating for a year. It's a different operator, so I don't think that that's necessary. We do have a letter of completion for the fire alarm system, but as work may be done on the space, and therefore sprinklers and fire alarm would need to be rearranged. I think that also should be a condition as opposed to requiring them to install or to prove installation, because they're going to be rearranging and they're going to need new sign-offs. Anybody else on this?
Item number 8, 36304BZ, 602 Fort Hamilton Parkway, Brooklyn.
Okay, we have proof of service of initial application and of notice of hearing to officials. Community Board recommends approval with 1 opposed and 3 abstentions. The ECB violation list shows approximately $10,500 in unpaid fines, and the violations are still current. The applicant needs to explain what's going on with that. The lot area in the statement of facts and in the resolution are different. So the applicant needs to verify what is correct, and our counsel should note if there's a change on the resolution. There is also a restrictive declaration recorded in 2005 against the property in connection with the 2005 BSA approval, which concerns hazardous material sampling and remediation. The applicant needs to provide a copy of the DEP notice of satisfaction and proof that it was recorded against the property as was required by the declaration, and that'd be interesting proof because it's not recorded against the property unless it's on another tax lot that I didn't find. With respect to the stacker parking, I just wondered, did the original financial analysis consider the costs of the stackers or of the attended parking? And we don't know what to compare this to, so I thought we should have a copy of the original financials, additional cost analysis and financials. The parking study also only looks at census tract data to argue that fewer than 50% of the households in the building will own a car. It does not discuss parking conditions in the area or whether the parking spaces are used by tenants on a temporary basis, you know, that somebody might rent a car and use the parking or have guests or, I don't know, whatever. Just to understand better how the parking lot is really used. It's different if they're only talking about who rents it from the building. And then they submitted apartment rental turnaround figures, you know, how frequently someone moves. I didn't understand the purpose of that. So, any other comments on this one?
I had some additional question, which was with regards to the parking requirement for commercial use. And the zoning does allow commercial use, and since the building does have commercial use, there's a certain amount of parking that would have to be provided for those proposed parking spaces, and that needs to be calculated into the parking analysis to indicate what is the required amount of parking for the commercial and what was then also proposed or required for the residential, and then the difference that they're asking. And I think the commercial got dropped out in the analysis.
Yeah, also according to a memo from AKRF, they indicated that the proposed parking would accommodate the needs, even if we drop the 93 spots to 58. And the SOF, the statement of facts, indicates that the retail currently is vacant, so it's not in use. So I'd like AKRF to like indicate that in their memo or their study and assure us that even with the retail in operation, it's not going to be any problems anticipated with the parking.
So
right-
they're studying a vacant retail. They
Exactly,
should
yes.
study an occupied retail,
Exactly,
basically.
yes.
We didn't waive the commercial parking.
No, but the issue, if you're doing a parking study and you're looking at demand, but I think these parking spaces were only supposed to be for
Residential.
residents,
Oh,
right?
for residential?
I think in the prior approval, it said that they were limited to residential.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, so they're not even so doing the calculations is important because what was required.
I'm not talking about the residential part of the parking, I'm talking about the on-street parking. Right now, the way AKRF is looking at it is they are considering that there is on-street parking available. And what I'm saying is, yes, it could be because the retail is currently vacant, but when the retail is in operation, it might be some on-street parking needed and it changes the situation.
That's
So,
true.
yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Okay.
From my side visit, parking was quite tight there.
Yeah, it looks, and even in
It
the
is.
photographs, the parking's tight. Okay. Any other comments? Nothing on the financial aspect of it? And does this implicate the financials in any way?
I mean, it might implicate the financials. You know, I don't know, looking at it, I think that they probably would have somehow factored in the parking income into it. And I don't know if they would have factored in the cost of the stackers.
So we need to look at the financials.
Yeah, we just have to wait and see.
They said that they calculated the rent, the annual income. but
Right.
We don't know more.
Well, they did it now as an exercise to show you
Oh.
that they're not going to make their money back by providing valet
Right.
parking. But I don't know if they did it in the financial, if they
Original fund.
included parking income into the total income.
Uh-huh.
But, you know, I don't see necessarily that there's a major issue with this case, even if it was that the parking might have been included into it. First of all, the building's built already, so it's not like you're going to be trimming anything in terms of a minimal variance. So the question to me really is providing half the amount of spaces gonna make this situation in the neighborhood a negative one in terms of the character finding? And from what I see from the information they've given us so far, I don't see that it's going to. You know, they're almost 100% leased up, and they're only using 30 parking spaces
Right.
as it is.
Right.
And so that information actually dovetails with the information they give you about the census tract car ownership. So
Right.
I don't see anything in what they've given me that's contradicting the fact that providing half the spaces would be okay.
Right, okay. Yeah, that's the general gist of the application anyway. It's more like just picking up those little loose threads that we're talking about.
Would taking the cost for the stackers from the original variance, if they originally submitted back when they got this 7221 variance granted, if they considered cost for these stackers into their financial analysis, now they are not gonna put these stackers, so this cost is not legit to be added to the financial. If we take this out, would that affect the size of the variance that we originally
You
granted?
can't undo the size of the variance. The building is built and it's almost totally leased up. What are you going to do at this point? Say, no, you cannot use one of the retail spaces? No. So it's
Right,
like
there's
you
nothing to
kind of
take
can't
away.
you can't take
Yeah.
anything away from this, so.
But the question is whether you should then grant a further relief, which is a reduction in the parking spaces, right? Because it was the minimum relief necessary.
Right, but they're basically telling you, given the fact that it was the minimum relief necessary, they are not going to be able to make the parking portion viable. So if it was a part of the financials, then what it's basically saying is, it's no longer the minimum relief. We need more relief. That's basically what they're saying, and I think that they've provided that information by showing a parking garage that is
Empty,
like, what,
half empty.
40%, 30% occupied, basically.
Right. Which we see on a lot of projects,
You know,
actually.
and one could even say that when you look at the surrounding neighborhood, the parking outside is tight. So even if the parking outside is tight, you would think then that would shift, if there were car ownership in the building, would shift people into that
Right.
building, and it's not.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm like,
Maybe there isn't car ownership and not that
Right.
people, well, because we don't, you know, the thing about charging for parking is you never know what people's maximum break points are, where they say, I can't pay this much per month for parking, so I'll park on the street.
And this is a
Right.
rental building, so I think that also, had this been an ownership, maybe the argument would have been slightly different. But this is a rental building.
Well, ownership, they also would have to pay for parking. You mean people would just have more money to pay for rent, not necessarily, right?
No, there's just more investment in it, and it's more transient population staying in the rental, so maybe ownership is less.
Really? Lots of people live in their apartments? Well, that's maybe what they're claiming. There's a big turnover, that it's transient.
Yeah.
But I don't know why, if anything, that might mean that people come and go who have cars, right? Why is transient nature have linked to whether you have a car or not? If anything, it might make you have a car if you are transient, you're moving your stuff all the time.
Well, you're good friends. But I agree with Commissioner Otley Brown, is that the data and the way the parking is being utilized by the current tenant matches. It's only that issue of whether this is going to have a detrimental effect on the neighborhood.
Yeah. Okay.
Item number 9, 9707BZ, 80-16 Cooper Avenue, Queens.
Okay, we have proof of service of initial application to officials and notice of hearing to officials. We need the community board recommendation. They provided DOB printouts with respect to the fire alarm in the building, but no indication of a sprinkler system that was shown on the approved drawings would be installed. So they need to provide proof that the fire alarm and sprinkler systems were installed and operational. Anybody else? No.
Item number 10, 14307BZ, 6404 Strickland Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, we have proof of service to officials. I don't know if we have, proof of service. Need to check whether we had proof of notice of hearing.
Proof of notice of hearing?
Yeah, I
This is
did any.
Extension of time, there's no
Time.
notice.
So, there's no notice?
No, there's no notice.
Service of hearing, on hearings?
No.
Okay.
Though the community
Yeah.
board,
No, there is a service of filing, because community board recommended denial. They have to serve the community board on the extension.
Not on
Okay.
time.
Well, we'll check, but anyway, they did. So, Community Board 18 recommended denial with one abstention, citing concerns about traffic and noise in a neighborhood with other religious institutions and a public school. The DOB filing history shows a 2008 NB, new building application, was disapproved in 2008 and administratively closed in 2012, and a 2016 Alt 1 to, quote, alter existing building with horizontal and vertical enlargements, which is pending, and no approvals or permits have been issued. The board's understanding in 2008 was that the existing building would be demolished to make way for the new building, which is what most of the drawings show. So I don't understand how this is an alteration. And, you know, oftentimes alterations are done to try to stay within the old building code, something like that. This is a totally new structure. I mean, they may be saving a little bit somewhere, but I don't know where that is. So I'd like to see a copy of the DOB filed plans. The statement of fact states that the work is now proceeding, in quotes. I'm not sure exactly what that means. To me, that sounds like construction. If that's the case, how are they doing that without permits?
I didn't see any construction on this.
No? Okay.
No, it's dead.
Dead. It's a dead site. Okay. Okay.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry. This
There's
is
an amendment.
Yeah, okay, yeah,
It does have,
okay.
notification.
Right, okay. The statement of facts also doesn't describe the revised program. So how does the, for example, congregation area at the second floor work, where there's apparently no area for seating? It's a very strange layout. It's basically a big corridor. So I'm not sure what it's doing. The statement of facts doesn't go through the changes to the plans, which would have been helpful because it's an amendment. One main entrance has been removed from East 64th Street, so the principal entrance will now be from Strickland with handicapped access from the side yard. There's kind of an odd ramp condition wrapping around the corner to access the side entrance, which doesn't work to allow handicap drop-off from the side yard. You have to drop off from the street. So you have to drop off on 64th Street as opposed to drive up, right? Which has an impact on traffic because it's slow when you're disembarking somebody who needs to use a ramp. The earlier version of the project had at-grade entry, which required no ramping, but now this is in a floodplain, so grade is apparently 9 feet with design flood elevation at 11 feet. So they have to lift it up, no choice. Neighbors expressed concern about traffic and parking, so the applicant really needs to discuss the effect of a single main entrance on Strickland as compared to the approved plans that had 2 entrances, which arguably would sort of better distribute traffic. Also, what is the purpose of the 2-foot wide concrete area on the site plan, which also needs to be shown on the first floor plan? It's not shown. It's not a path because it's only 2 feet wide, and I don't really understand what that's for. The height of the building to the roof above grade in the approved was 30 feet plus a 9-foot bulkhead. The height of the proposed is 31 feet plus bulkhead, so it's not a big difference in height. But in this version, the elevator bulkhead is 16'7", which is almost twice the height of the previous bulkhead. So why does it need such a high bulkhead? Sections and roof plan don't show also the high parapet walls that are sort of decorative that are on both facades. And I've seen this before with the same architect. The bulkheads aren't integrated with the decorative parapet walls. It's there's this sort of Tudor look, but then the bulkheads sort of smash up against the Tudor look and are not concealed by them. So I don't understand the whole point of having those decorative elements that are really just like stage sets because they don't have any depth, right? So that needs to be handled better. And a kitchen is now shown on the main floor, which wasn't in the previous approval. So what's the proposed management of trash and perishables? And the kitchen is very large. It has actually, it's really a full-size kitchen. So what's the intended use for this kitchen? It's It's not just a warming kitchen. Also, there are a lot of windows now. In the prior approval, they were glass block. So there needs to be sound attenuation. That's required of all the houses of worship. And in the Strickland elevation, there's these two sort of T-shaped looking elements on the property lines that I thought looked like stanchion lighting, but I don't know what they are. And so they could explain that. Other comments? Nobody?
No.
Okay.
Item number 11, 9708BZ, 84 Sanford Street, Brooklyn. This is a compliance case.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay. We're holding this hearing because a condition of the March 2016 approval for the extension of time to obtain a C of O was the filing every 6 months of reports with the BSA showing that testing of the sub-slab depressurization system had taken place and that the system is functioning properly. In response to calendaring this compliance hearing, an inspection was finally conducted on October 31st and November 10th, and a report filed indicating that the SSDS is operating properly, and air quality was also monitored, which we requested that they do. The summary of air quality analysis states that indoor and outdoor air quality levels are the same. However, if you look at the report, they're not the same, and I don't know how such a statement was made. So acetone levels, for instance, outside are 7.12 micrograms per cubic meter, which is lower than inside, which is 9.65 micrograms. Ethanol was 10.6 micrograms per cubic meter outside, and unless this is a typo, but it doesn't look like it, up to 327 micrograms on the inside, so it's a very big difference. Ethanol is described by, from my online research, by the Mount Sinai Medical Center study as a neurotoxin affecting brain development. So we need to understand better what these levels mean. And then I'm just curious why inside would be higher than outside. Also, other VOCs measured somewhat higher inside and were not summarized in the report. So I don't know how the report concludes outside and inside are the same. I'm also curious that the outdoor measurements were taken in the driveway rather than on the sidewalk. Is the driveway part of the property that was contaminated, under which would have been a VOC source that maybe didn't receive sub-slab, any kind of vapor barrier, sub-slab depressurization? And also I noted that the monitor was located near an outside exhaust stack, so it's kind of receiving the pollutants potentially from the inside, so does that skew the results? And also, we actually have a compliance issue on this, how this whole thing is going to work, because we want the sub-slab to be continued to be monitored, and obviously, with only a few months between the last approval and this compliance hearing, there was no submission. And so how do we go forward with this? Because this site has a history of having a non-functioning SSDS system. So, do we need to see a contract with a monitoring company? Maybe that's one, like a permanent contract. And should the reports, the reports being directed to us is perhaps the wrong location, so maybe we could get the Department of Health involved in this one. It is, after all, a school. There are little kids breathing ethanol, for example. Any other comments? No?
Item number 12, 3615BZ, 241 Atlantic Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, we have proof of service of initial application and notice of hearing to officials. Community Board recommends approval. There is a TCO from 2017 indicating BSA approval and fire alarm and sprinkler systems installed. A signed and sealed architect's letter was also provided that states the systems were installed, so I think that's proof proof enough, made it onto the C of O, that's very convenient. Right, anybody else? No.
Appeals calendar, continued hearing items, item number 13, 2016-2A, 74 Buttonwood Road, Staten Island, the adjournment.
Yep.
Item number 14, 2017-52A, or 1109 Metropolitan Avenue, Brooklyn.
Scrolling. Okay. The appellant provided further information about the business's operation, indicating it is a 24/7 operation, and the caretaker's role is to ensure safe access to the building at all times and handling storage and maintenance of equipment. The appellant also went through the accessory use test. At 678 square feet, the apartment, I think, is clearly incidental to the principal use. And I think the nature of the business as a 24/7 operation really does demand a full-time person be present who knows about the operation in a way that multiple shifts of security guards absolutely wouldn't. The applicant pointed out that this person would maintain the equipment, so they're using sprayers and other kinds of things that probably need to be cleaned and so on. So, and to the point discussed at the last hearing, customary operations are impossible to prove with business models that change constantly. That the caretaker's apartments have been permitted in connection with Use Group 9 artist studios, I find to be helpful in this because I think the functions are quite analogous between a hand sign painting company. So basically, they're painters. And actually,
Studios and similar.
yes, similar. And by the way, many, many famous artists get their start by being sign painters. So sometimes it's the way that they support themselves while they're working on their own work. So I think you should be able to find analogous uses where you're sort of a one of a kind, and in fact, this is the only hand-painted sign company in New York, I think perhaps even in the country. So it's not like there's a lot of people going to copy this model, right? The further caveat is that the main reason for having the caretaker is both the 24/7 operation and the unusual location in an underserved area that's prone to vandalism. Because they're not asking to have caretakers in their other locations where they say they don't have vandalism problems. So I actually think all of the prongs of the accessory use test are satisfied, and therefore, given that fact, I don't think the board is required to determine here whether caretakers' apartments are always legitimate accessory uses to every underlying use group 3 and 18 use. And I say this in part because I am sympathetic to DOB's fears that a decision that would say it applies to every single use group 3 to 18 use, no matter what, could lead to a storm of large residential units being improperly added to commercial uses in manufacturing districts where no real caretaking actually takes place. So I appreciate DOB's, the bind that they're in, but in this case, I think it meets the test, the three-pronged test.
I have been by that site at kind of pretty late at night at odd times, and it is very isolated. There isn't that much vehicle, and the store is operating. The people working there pretty much at odd hours. So definitely, I think having an eyes and ears on that is a reasonable argument that they're making.
Anybody else?
I mean, I acknowledge the difficulty in proving the customarily found in the last hearing, precisely because it's very hard to find a sign painter's business elsewhere in the city. And I thought that it was very helpful also that they use the accessory artist studios with the accessory caretaker apartments, because that was most like what's going on here. However, here it's to even a greater degree and a greater amount of intensity, which suggested more of a need for somebody to help manage the site and manage the building and the equipment. So I was convinced, further convinced, actually.
Right. I mean, I would say that, for the more famous artists who have big studios where they have a lot of staff, it's a similar kind of thing. And they're working all night because they're on deadline, all that kind of stuff, so.
Zoning calendar, decision items, item number 15, 4-15BZ, 119 Webster Avenue, Brooklyn.
Sorry. Oh, this is a very long noted case, that's why I can't find it. Okay. I think we're going to need to reopen this because I learned some things. The drawings were revised to show more decorative exterior stair enclosures at front and side, which is what we had discussed at the last hearing. However, the architect states that the windows opening to the stairs must be enclosed. In the first place, I'm not sure that the architect is looking in the correct section of the building code with respect to this staircase. This is an exterior stair, and unless I'm mistaken, and of course the building department needs to verify this, but section 27-376 should apply for exterior stairs, and it allows openings in building walls adjoining stairs in buildings that are less than 4 stories. The reason that I care about this, because otherwise, close up the windows, is because if you look at the actual building, the building itself and the plans don't match. So the plans show these tiny windows that are to be blocked up, but in fact, the windows are very large, and there's 2 sets of large windows in pairs, and they're surrounded by an arch. So there's these decorative arches that go around them, and it's all part of a row of 4 matching houses. And in addition, the notes say, brick the windows up with bricking to match existing. This is one of the rare buildings in New York that has Flemish diagonal bond brickwork. Go find someone who knows how to do that. You're going to have to go to Belgium probably and find like a really old guy, because so you're not going to match that brickwork. So, and to just patch it up with bricks that your average sort of kind of mason has, no. So that will actually do violence to the facade. So I think that the architect needs to come up with a better solution and to verify the building code, because I'm not sure that he's right about which code applies, because once the staircase is open the way it's shown, it's no longer an interior stair, it's an exterior stair, right? So, and with respect to the issue of bus parking, so there's a lot of open issues still, unfortunately, with the application. The applicant submitted a very long-term lease, which was impressive. What is it, 30 years plus renewals of 20?
20 plus the 5.
Right. Typical. For off-site bus parking at 363 Day Hill Road, which interestingly is located in an R5 zoning district. So you might ask, the first question is bus parking in an R5 zoning district? The next is that the 1965 C of O for this property indicates it is a 1-story use group 16 manufacturing building. Although Google Street View actually shows a school bus parked inside. It just happened to have caught that moment when the door was open, right? There's also a stop work order on that site for demolition without permits, and an active defaulted ECB violation from May of this year for occupancy contrary to the C of O, where the inspector observed improper parking of 4 school buses in an open yard. So clearly we have a problem with parking on this site, and I'm actually kind of surprised that council didn't do a little bit of investigation before allowing his or her client to submit this. And as we all know, long-term parking leases must be at locations where the use is permitted, either as of right or by variance, whichever way, but permitted. So, yeah. Anybody else? Just when you think it's a simple solution, it's not simple. Okay.
Item number 16, 2215 BZ 219 26th Street, Brooklyn.
This one, we finally have seeker sign off, so we're done with this one, I think.
Item number 17, 2016 4340 BZ 13102 40th Road, Queens.
Okay, so this one, we're going to need to reopen in part because I listened to the October 3rd hearing because for a number of reasons, but one of them was I couldn't figure out why the plans we were looking at had nothing to do with my notes or what was claimed in the cover letter that we received. And so it turns out that the plans that were handed to us at the October 3rd hearing, which I don't know what those are actually, because these are clocked in on November 21, were never emailed to submit. So as a result, none of the commissioners had a chance to review the materials that were submitted, handed to us on October 3rd. And therefore, I also don't know whether the plans that were hand clocked in but never emailed on November 21 are the same plans that were discussed at the October 3rd hearing, because I doubt this has a date on it because nobody ever puts dates on drawings anymore. Yeah, there's no update. So I don't know if they're the same. So I'm going to go through my notes, but they may not be relevant to the set of plans. They are relevant, I believe, to the letter from the surveyor. Okay, so we have been trying without success, I think, to clear up the elevations that are shown, the elevation designations relative to datum that are shown on the sections that have equated NAVD 88 elevation, well, at that time it was elevation 213 to altitude above mean sea level elevation 213. And I looked at these plans really quickly, and the elevations are all different now. So even the FAA's restriction on height was 213 above altitude above mean sea level. And when I look at these elevations, or these sections on this November 21 clocked in, the altitude above mean sea level is 228. So I'm so confused, and it's expressed in NGVD, which is not the same. So I did listen to what was quite a painful hearing of trying to explain that all of these different designations of datum are different. And I studied even further NAVD 88 and NGVD are land-based datum, and sea level, obviously, is sea-based datum, and it's based on materials that are provided by the National Oceanographic and Oceanographic Atmospheric Organization. So you can't say that they're spoken of in the same terms. So what we had asked at the last hearing very clearly was that the surveyor verify on the drawings and in the letter and say, I looked at the drawings, and all of these different designations and all of the altitudes shown on the designations are correct. And I certify that those are the correct designations. And instead what we got, I think, because that's what we reviewed, that's what made it into our PDF folder, was a letter from their surveyor, which is a little bit of a lesson in how you calculate the difference between NAVD 88 and GVD 29, and then they used mean high water level. So even if you only went with the engineer's letter, which doesn't help. I didn't want to be taught how to do it and then go do it. I wanted the surveyor to tell us that the drawings are accurate, because that's not our job to determine the accuracy of the drawings. That's the job of the surveyor, and in this case, maybe the aeronautical engineer, because the surveyor seems to not really understand what FAA uses. So if we just used what it said on that engineering letter, NAVD 88 and National Geodetic are 1.1 foot apart. But if we look at how NAVD 88 converts to mean high water level, it's a 3-foot difference. But the FAA doesn't use mean high water levels. It uses average altitude above mean sea level, which is a completely different thing. And so when I went onto the NOAA website, the only one I could find that actually did those comparisons was for Los Angeles, and every one of them is different. So in Los Angeles, mean high water level is 8.58. Mean sea level is 6.65. NAVD 88 is 4. So they're completely unrelated to each other. And to say that one is expressed in terms of the other is inaccurate, and we're not going anywhere until a surveyor signs and seals and certifies that whatever it says on these drawings represented in all of those different datum are accurate and match what's required by the FAA, because the FAA set the maximum height and this cannot exceed it. And that's it. And there's not going to be, and there was a lot of begging going on at the last hearing, not going to hear any of it. They just have to do it.
And this exceeds the FAA stipulation of 213 feet.
Yes. So I'm so totally confused, and I just have to say, having listened to the hearing again and understood, the architect wasn't there. Someone who described himself as a project manager was there, who seemed to have been taking responsibility for the architect's drawings. Not okay. An architect signs and seals this. There are licenses on the line. So the architect, and I'd have to say, if you want to talk about it, bring your surveyor, but I don't really see that there's anything to talk about. It just has to be done. So, I mean, it's really unbelievable.
We could ask them to provide us with copy of these drawings with the same datum that's referred to in the FAA document. So, like when somebody applied to the TA, the Transport Authority of New York, for a permission or to work adjacent to one of their stations or one of their subway, usually they require the elevations mentioned or indicated in 2 systems. The first one is whatever you want to use. The second one is our defined system, which is usually about 100 feet above the other datums. For these drawings, we could ask for the same thing. Use whatever datum you want to use. We're not gonna ask you to go with a specific one. But in the meantime, give us the corresponding elevation with respect to the FAA document reference one.
Right.
So
that's kind of what they attempted to do here. This all started a very long time ago, because this has been unfortunately in hearings for a long time, because the applicant has refused to understand how serious this is. So the FAA was very clear that the maximum height is measured in altitude above mean sea level, and that number was 213 feet above mean sea level, right? And what happened was, we see the drawings, and we see that they're saying that's NAVD 88, 213 feet. So we're looking, they're not the same thing. They can't be the same number, right? So we said that over and over again, and it wasn't until the last hearing where literally the day before the hearing, they took a look and they corrected the drawings and said, oh, you're right, and the height of the building went down by 2 feet. But then they're, for whatever reason that I don't understand, they're also using NGVD on their drawings, which isn't used anymore, so I don't know why they insist on using it, but they are using it, and because of that, I don't actually know what it's going to do to the project, because we haven't seen, they're expressing above mean sea level in NGVD. It's not, they're totally different measurements. So, and all you have to do is look on the website, the NOAA website, and there's all these comparisons. So a surveyor or the FAA must know what, the FAA's engineer must know what those numbers are. And they just have to clear it up, because basically what I was seeing is the project manager was taking responsibility for determining what these elevations are by looking it up on FEMA's website. That's not a professional's analysis. That's a Wikipedia searcher's
It
analysis.
should be a surveyor. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So, okay.
Item number 18. Item number 18, 2017-60BZ, 111 Barrow Street, Manhattan.
We're just getting an update on the air quality.
We got the sign off and we just need a one-page, there was one comment from DEP about needing a phone number for
Oh,
a safety
okay.
officer. So
Okay, please submit the phone number today. Okay, that's it, right? It says, and then says DEP will also require indoor testing upon completion of the project,
So
right?
that would be a condition.
That'll be a condition, right? And you got that's the phone numbers for the CHASP? Okay. Okay, good, thanks.
Continued hearing items, item number 19, 12815BZ through 13015BZ, 680, 682, 684 Van Duzen Street, Staten Island.
Okay. Okay, so at long last, the project has been revised to include car access to the site, up a driveway onto a newly opened portion of Broad Street, and into 3 sets of 2-car garages that are located under 3 single-family houses. I think this is a much safer solution for all concerned. I know the borough president also preferred this kind of solution. Obviously, the applicant will have to work with DOT for the relocation of that traffic light pole. Counsel for the owner is insisting, though I find it very confusing, but anyway, that the property right to that portion of Broad is an easement and not fee ownership, so it won't be included in the zoning lot, hence doesn't allow for additional floor area. The center house, I note, has a landlocked bedroom with a skylight. So I just want them to make sure that what the code allowances are, because we are not here waiving section 23-86, which has to do with the distance between lot lines and legally required windows, if that's actually applicable here. 23-86. That has to do with the fact that it's a landlocked window, and we're just looking at zoning waivers, right, not building code waivers. And there are, the multiple dwelling law actually allows, but this is not a multiple dwelling, or at least that's not how it's being filed. Multiple dwelling law allows in tenement buildings, for example, the top to a floor to have a skylight to supplant a window. But I don't know if the building code allows that on new construction. So, in which case that room becomes a study, something like that. By including the side access, the front yard is a complying but reduced 15 feet, and the FAR has increased to 0.49, which is more than the previously proposed 0.36, so nearly at its maximum of 0.5. If I understand correctly, then the only waivers being sought here are for use group 2 to allow more than 1 family on the site, and a front yard waiver from Broad Street, and that the lot coverage waiver will be obtained from city planning. Okay. So financials and cost estimates then need to support the need for 3 units as opposed to 2, because we've been looking at 2 units. The claim is made that cutting the driveway for Broad Street access raises the costs and creates the need for the extra unit. Construction costs for the 3 townhouses as compared to the 2 houses went up to $370,000, up by $370,000. So then, because this is a question that we raised the last time about the cost of actually cutting that opening, I looked very carefully at cost estimates. There still appears to be overlap in costs between the site work and foundations for the houses and the same work for the driveway. So, and why is the same work per line item so much cheaper for the driveway than for the townhouses, such as rubbish removal, land clearing, excavation, trucking? All those things cost way more for the townhouses than for the driveway. Why does the guy charge more because he knows it's going to be a house than a driveway to truck soil? And why do you have to pay a surveyor twice to stake out the house, and then you pay him again to stake out the driveway? That's not actually how a surveyor works. Or why would you install 2 sets of zipper drains in the driveway when you only have one driveway? Or 2 separate sets of construction fences when you only have one construction project? Or separate PVC piping for stormwater? All those are overlapping costs. And then I compared the new proposal to the old one, where at the last hearing, we said you need to remove these overlapping costs, and therefore the price of doing the work on the site for Broad Street will go down. And the cover letter said, you know, they got rid of the overlapping costs, but actually there were no changes made between the last hearing and this one on any of the Broad Street site work or concrete costs. And so all those numbers are incorrect. And also, why is the site work for the 3 townhouses $250,000 when the site work for the 2 townhouses was $210,000 without the Broad Street driveway, which was separately estimated to cost $176,000? And why is the site work for the 3 townhouses now $250,000 when it was $228,000 in the initial submission? How did it go up? And so I have a lot of questions about the costs. And I don't know whether we have any open seeker issues on this. Do we? No? Okay.
I also have questions about the financials, not about the costs, but I do want to state that we really should just note for the record that the project originally was 3 single-family
Yes.
townhomes, and now it's actually larger, 3 single-family townhomes. And I don't know if they ever established that that was the minimum back then anyway, so now to assert that the minimum needs to be larger, that's a problem. So I just wanted to state that because it could be lost in the various hearings, and we may not realize that we actually started out smaller, and here we are with a similar kind of site plan, and now all of a sudden the buildings are larger. Okay, so I just wanted to state that.
Well, and to pick that up, you know, one argument was, which we talked about, they said, oh, Broad Street's costing us $175,000 to open, right? So we said, well, the cost will be offset because you'll have more floor area. And so you could get more floor area and have 2 houses. And then, so they would need to argue somehow the 2 houses aren't marketable with more floor area, because this is a neighborhood that has a lot of pretty small houses, but not all of them are 15 feet wide. Just up the street are developments that are wider, a little, you know, maybe they're 18 feet wide or something, but row houses, so.
Right, and I think that a lot of their assumptions are still in play. So before I talked about the site value, because I felt that they might have been, you know, I wasn't quite sure what was going on, but they weren't using the format that we usually follow for valuing the site, which is basically saying we should value it based on the available FAR that can be used as of right. And what they were doing was valuing it based on what they felt was usable land versus worthless land. So that was leading them to a different number. And I would have to say that I don't think that that's an appropriate way to do it, because what it does is it muddies the water as to what's usable and what isn't, because you may not be able to put a house on the land, but it's got floor area that could be used elsewhere. So you kind of can't make the statement, it's worthless, I'm not going to value it. You have to account for it. Now, we've had cases before where we have land that's been valued that has a great grade differential, so much so that the portion in the back is probably not usable. And what we ask the applicant to do is to assign some kind of value to that portion of the land. And usually what they do is they do it, assign a nominal value per square foot based on what excess land goes for in that area. So they do the exercise that basically kind of grounds their assumptions in fact, and that's all I'm asking for here. I would like them to do that. Now, in addition to that, I disagreed with how they were adjusting the site value comps. They were adjusting all the comparables upwards to account for the size and utility, and I don't understand why you would make adjustments upwards for that, because the two comparables that are of question here are actual smaller rectangular level properties. And that's actually prime for development, smaller rectangular level. So I don't see why that's considered inferior to a subject that you're already telling me is so encumbered that you can't even develop on part of it. So I think they really need to take those assumptions and actually reverse them and make them negative assumptions. It should be negative because the comparables are actually more valuable. Now, as regards the townhomes, I feel that they're still, even in this iteration, being larger, are still undervalued. They are only adjusting their comparables upwards by 5% as regards the subject for size. And what they're basically doing is saying that the size does not account for that much of an upwards adjustment because larger size townhomes don't necessarily sell for more higher price. However, it's not borne out by their own data. So while they're saying there should only be a 5% upwards adjustment of the comparables, they're showing between their 2,100 square foot comparable home and their 1,350 square foot comparable home, there's a difference of 15% in value per square foot. So that's certainly more than 5%. And then they actually have a chart in their attached letter that shows that there's a price differential between the 1,000 square foot to 1,500 square foot homes and the 2,000 to 2,500 square foot homes. And that price differential is 20%. And that's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about townhomes that are 4,000 square feet or 5,000 square feet where maybe the additional square footage isn't really making as big a dent on the value or bigger effect on the value because, you know, who wants an attached townhome that's 4,000 square feet? By then you just want a detached home. This is a question where the actual homes on the plans are about 2,400 square feet each. So this actually speaks to, you know, what's going on in this letter. And so that's a 20% differential between small townhomes and large townhomes. So all of their comparables that are 1,350 square feet and 1,750 square feet should be adjusted upwards by more than 5%, just based on their own information that they're giving me. So that's how I concluded that they're probably still undervalued. And both of those things actually speak to the minimal variance. So maybe 3 townhomes attached are necessary, but maybe they should be smaller. So it's still in play. And the only comment I had about the hard construction costs is that I had asked them to reconcile their numbers through the various pages, and they did not. So, for instance, the narrative on page 6 and the pro forma spreadsheet on page 15 and the development cost summary on page 17 show one set of numbers, and the cost estimator on pages 51 and 58 shows another set of numbers. They're fairly close, but they still need to either reconcile them all or tell us why they're different.
Okay. Anybody else? All right. And I'm just wondering if all of those things going to play goes back to the 2 units. I mean, we preferred the 2 units because these are such narrow little houses, right? And the houses that are up the street in a new development are wider by about 2 feet, maybe 3 feet, right? Plus, what's very odd about this is we see so many variance applications where people say, I can't live in a 15-foot wide house, right? So And it's true, the build-it-back houses, aren't they 15 feet wide? But those are like emergency situations, and those are bungalows that are being replaced by 15-foot wide prefab houses. So it's hard to connect all those dots when you have so many conflicting approaches to what is a marketable house.
True, but even though they are only 15 feet wide, they still are 2,400 square feet. So they have a nice floor plate on
Yes,
each
they do.
floor. So, I could see where they would definitely want 3 instead of 2 that are larger.
Okay, fair. Okay. All right.
Item number 20, 17915 BZ, 129 Taffy Place, Brooklyn.
All right. I think actually the only open issue on this was financials.
And they addressed all of my
Okay,
issues.
cool.
Item number, may I go on? Item number 21, 23415 BZ, 1223 67th Street, Brooklyn.
Okay. Okay. I'm not sure if we didn't receive a complete submission or whether something is missing or, I'm just curious about whether we should be waiting for the results of the ZRD1 request concerning the perimeter wall heights and therefore adjourning. I'm not really sure.
I don't believe they want an adjournment. They made that submission, and then when I spoke to them, I asked them to sort of explain what these plans are, and they submitted that letter.
Yeah, but it doesn't explain the state of things, really.
So they're going to be, they should be here tomorrow.
Okay, so drawing A09, 10, and 11 of what they call the post-enlargement second, third, and roof floors shows a new encroachment into the required front yard. We discussed at length several times that under the 73-622 special permit, we have no authority to waive the front yard requirements. The plan was supposed to have been modified to eliminate the front yard waiver completely, right? The open question for the special permit is actually the perimeter wall heights, and we directed the applicant at the last hearing that in the event that ZRD1 did not support their argument with respect to perimeter wall heights, or that the applicant preferred to move forward today, which was why we were trying to get this done with 2 alternates, that the plans would be amended to eliminate both the front yard and perimeter wall height noncompliances. So that there would be one that eliminates both of those, and another one that would eliminate only the front yard noncompliance in case they got a ZRD1 in their favor, right? Plan A09A, which is supposed to be the one that's eliminating the perimeter wall noncompliance, continues to show at the second floor a new unpermitted obstruction in the front yard that they characterize somehow as an enclosed balcony. Whether that's compliant is really for DOB to determine, but I don't see how. Yeah.
It was enclosed on 3 sides with only a window cut out on the side.
Right, so I just don't know how they do that. And then the third floor is set back to clear the front yard line. So it's set back properly with respect to the front yard line. But they didn't provide us any information about how the proposed alternative complies with the maximum building envelope under section 23-631. And that's the one that goes, you take it to the perimeter wall heights, and then you do these diagonal lines at a certain angle, and you connect the lines, and the building has to fall behind that. So if it's rising straight up and it falls behind that, good. If not, then those walls have to be set back until it fits within the envelope. You're not required to have a pitched roof. That's just what most people do because, envelopes tend to design buildings, unfortunately. So, but they didn't show us that, and we don't have any authority to waive the penetration of essentially what's the sky exposure envelope without, in the 73-622. And then the third floor plans on both sets of drawings have a conflicting piece of information regarding the retention of existing perimeter walls, what they need to clarify, it shows it's both staying and going, so we need to know which one that is. And that was it.
I mean, I fully agree with you on the front yard incursion. I didn't see that they resolved that problem just by kind of cutting a few holes into the wall and then saying it's now a balcony. So that was my major point as well. And as to just avoiding the perimeter wall issue by setting that third floor back behind the front yard, I didn't know whether or not that actually addressed that or not, because as you said, it does not go to a slope. And who knows if the actual corners of that building actually still penetrate the required setback there. So it's definitely, we definitely need more information about it. And also, the other question I had was that as to what they were retaining, the second floor didn't quite seem accurate as to the width of the front being retained. I felt it was a little confusing because part of that building comes on the curve, and so I wasn't sure. It just seemed to me that more than a half of a foot should come off of the front wall. It just seemed,
Okay.
yeah, when you looked at what was being retained and what's not, what's new.
Okay. Any other comments? No?
Item number 22, 275-15BZ, 115 East 97th Street, Manhattan.
This is the Marymount School. Okay. The revised plans were provided with a cover letter stating that open space is being provided on the roof of the school building in compliance with Section 23-151 and 24-164, which is what we asked them to do, to go back and redesign a building that complies with the lot coverage regulations. I'd like to just make a note to both the applicant and to our council that they provided a residential open space compliance diagram, but it was separate from the main set of drawings. That needs to be included in the main set because that's critical to proving to us and to DOB that the lot coverage requirements are being met by the site, right? I note that there's a separate entrance on 98th Street that leads to a separate elevator to the roof. That's supposed to be for the residents of the residential building, so they have access to the open space. They need to provide more information on how this will be controlled to separate strangers from students, because I note that elevator also stops at other floors in the building. And I kind of understand its purpose. It's near the truck dock, so you unload goods and all that stuff. And the school elevators also stop at the roof level. So will students have access to the residential open space? And then in that case, they're interacting with strangers, so how's that actually going to work? And then I just want to be clear that the BSA is not opining on whether the roof areas on the school building meet the requirements of Section 24-164 for residential open space. And as stated in their cover letter, no waiver of the residential lot coverage or open space requirements are being sought here. So that's off the table. DOB, that's for DOB and the applicant to pursue on their own. They do need, however, to make sure that their height factor calculations are correct in light of the fact that they're using the rooftops for open space. They need to look at how you calculate height factor when rooftops are used for open space. The tower coverage calculations appear to be incorrect since they are not taking into account the coverage of the building in the C18X district because they're applying to the entire, their 40% is being applied to the entire zoning lot, and they're not including the coverage of the residential building in that, or they're applying the 40% coverage to the entire lot, and they should only be applying it to the R72. I didn't look into how tower lot coverage regulations work on a split lot, but one of them is the correct answer, and they're sort of doing this mix and match, and that's not allowed. Waivers requested are now limited to rear yard equivalent, height and setback, and curb cut, which is all related specifically to the school's programmatic requirements. The original proposal and this one have a subcellar gym that's 43 foot 6 inches below grade. The original building was 12 stories, 174 feet high, and the revised is a much more agreeable 10 stories and 149 feet high, so significantly reduced massing-wise and probably much less expensive to build. The as-of-right version continues to show a 34-foot and 60-foot setback from the side streets above the first floor. The as-of-right needs to be corrected to reflect the same residential rooftop access solution as in the proposed, and a one-story permitted obstruction in the rear yard. A rear yard equivalent placing all of the yard on 97th Street would actually allow the theater to be located on the 98th Street side, I think. So, which would, yeah. So that would be the same location as the theater is in the proposed, and they would just move the entire rear yard equivalent to 97th Street. There is a 34-foot 6-inch setback at the lower cellar level from 97th Street. I don't understand the reason for that. I know that they have some kind of storage. I guess they're using, what are those called? Like a thermal well or something like that? Geothermal. But I'm not sure exactly what that is, but it seems like perhaps if the mechanical systems were shifted to the street frontage, couldn't the deep cellar then accommodate the theater space, or rather shift it away from the street frontage? I know you need some access to the street where you put your mechanicals, but they could be on the other side, on the 98th Street side, underground perhaps, or, yeah, I'm just not sure. But it seemed like if, instead of having that setback, you might be able to put the theater in the cellar, and at one point they talked about not being allowed to do that because there are fire code partition requirements, but there's ways around that where you put adequate fire separations and adequate egress. So I actually, maybe there's no way to do adequate egress. That's another possibility. But, one of the reasons is we've never been told what the minimum dimensions for a theater are, only what the fly space is, right? And in all those photographs they showed us of all those many schools, there were schools that looked like they had, 10 seats in a row or 15 seats in a row. This is a much bigger theater, so had they come to the conclusion that the theater needs to be as big as it is, right? They never gave us that information. And also, what's the reason for the rear yard at the interior portion of the lot being 2 feet shy of compliance? They never explained that. It looks like maybe there are columns that are obstructing, but that's not the same thing as requiring an entire 2 feet extension, and why can't the columns be back on the 30 feet? They actually never addressed that need. And since this building has a fifth floor terrace on 97th Street, I don't know whether noise studies have been amended both to reflect the new building, because it's completely different design, so noise impact will be different, and also air quality impact will be different because the roof heights are different and so on. Also, they don't discuss how that roof terrace will be used. It seems to be shown as planted, so maybe they're going to be doing some sort of greenhouse-oriented thing like we see in so many other schools. So in terms of requested waivers versus programmatic requirements, I understand more or less why the theater needs to be the dimensions it is, not that they've given us any support and we have to have that, and therefore why must be located on the 98th Street side in the required rear yard equivalent. And that I also understand that classrooms need to be provided with light, so they need to be on the 97th Street side. But I don't understand why there are so many offices in this project, way more than in the last version, and why the classrooms facing 97th Street actually can't be pulled back. So this is a discussion we had about another school very recently, where we said the offices can't drive the waivers, because you can put offices anywhere. It's the classrooms that are critically located at window walls, right? But why can't the classrooms in this case, because it's such a long, kind of inefficient plan, why can't the classrooms pull back from 97th earlier? And the only reason that I might say that they shouldn't pull back is because from a street wall continuity perspective, where you've got those two tenement buildings on 97th Street, you would be breaking up the street wall. But on the other hand, with school arrivals, it's not a bad thing to have a little area gathering place, because one of the reasons that people don't like schools in their neighborhood is all the kids gather on your stoop. And if instead there's a little front yard area for the kids to gather, then it's sort of works better with kind of function in the neighborhood.
But didn't we ask them to expand into that
Into
front
the
yard
front
and
yard.
create the building to lower the bulk?
We did.
Oh, okay.
And so I don't know that we did ask them to do all of that, but at the same time, then I look at how the building is laid out, and I see what my impression is, lots of infill program. I see lots of offices that they didn't have before, and I see classrooms in the weirdest places. So, like, there are 2 classrooms on the auditorium floor, on the theater floor, all by themselves at the back. And in order for students to get there, they walk past offices and things like that. It's just extremely strange. And it seems just like the building's unnecessarily elongated. And so when you look at the need for the waiver, because it's program driving the need, then it seems like they're just filling up the mass, but not with program. And in addition, it's weird because the floor that has the 2 classrooms on it and the theater, those are described as like math classes and things like that. So that's something that's used all the time by the kids, right? And so they kind of wander down this area where there's sort of no active school stuff. You would think that's where offices should go for administration, but there's so many administrative offices, you know, so that's the other part of it. And let's see. And then also there's window walls dedicated to mechanical rooms on the 2nd floor, and I don't understand that. You have a rear yard, for instance, if you actually need your mechanical rooms to have direct access to the outside, why wouldn't that be at that interior rear yard? And why would you have that on your like decorative front and also on a place where you're short on light on windows in this site? And then, because the other part is the kitchen, known as the servery, has the best room in the house. It's got windows facing 98th and windows facing the back. Meanwhile, the dining room has landlocked areas. So again, from a layout perspective, I actually don't understand this. And again, in terms of the requested waivers, you look at it's the kitchen that's within the setback area, right? And the dining room, you know, you could argue you need to fit this many kids in the dining room, and therefore we need a dining room X big. But the kitchen in the setback area, I actually don't understand that. And then, you know, and the previous plans did provide the setbacks, granted with a taller building. And it was providing the setbacks to comply with the lot coverage requirements, but we're not asking that it goes anywhere near meeting the lot coverage requirements, you know, under the old scheme. And then, and I think for a lot of what's going on is I actually don't understand the program at all. So there are all these classrooms scattered around the building, it seems haphazardly. And they don't, you know, though they give us a schedule of how the classrooms will be occupied, they don't actually explain anything about the pedagogy. Like, they don't explain whether there are homerooms or, how the kids arrive at school and how they're distributed. Is it like everyone knows, some people go to algebra and some people go to science, and no one actually ever ends up in one classroom? They don't explain, like, the difference between, say, a 9th grader and a 12th grader in terms of who's arriving. I actually find this because unlike some of the great programmatic analyses that we've had, this one is really minimal. They'll show us, there's like this pretty thing about Fab Labs, which we know a lot about already, right? And there's a thing about the theater. But we don't know the dimensions of the theater. We don't know why there needs to be this many classrooms. They actually don't explain it. And then we got a letter from the Cardinal, I think, about the need for a separate chapel. So I understand the need for a separate chapel. We have religious schools that have separate prayer spaces, but there's a class in religion. You would think maybe religion would be taught in the chapel, so then that would free up a classroom. And so maybe it can't be. I mean, maybe you need audiovisual aids, that you can't have in a chapel. I don't know what the constrictions are, but they don't explain any of that. And then, so I just feel like the program is, the program is being created to fill out the shape of the building rather than the other way around. And let's see. Oh, and also offices are not explained at all anywhere. And so usually we'll get a description. We have this many administrators. We have these kinds of teaching private lesson programs or something like that. They don't tell us any of that. They talk about school performances, and they don't tell us where those productions currently take place. They're pretty fancy, right? So are they renting space? It's not clear. And then just for some detailed stuff on the curb cut, they need to show the location of the existing curb cut on the proposed plans and indicate its modification to accommodate the proposed curb cut, and dimension the curb cuts and distance from the adjoining curb cut on both the as of right and the proposed. And doesn't the DOT have to sign off on curb cut locations? And they also have one street tree that's going to be removed to take care of the curb cut. And it seems as if it might not comply with DOT and Parks Department distance rules to the tree. So they need to show that it does. And then with respect to the traffic and pedestrian study, I'm trying to understand why the assumption is that most students will arrive at the 97th Street entrance with 97th Street westbound. So that makes it sound like all the students live east of the school, and there are not a lot of blocks east of the school.
Well, also the subway station is to the east, so maybe they're assuming students are coming by a subway?
No, but this is about traffic. So students would come by subway, but there's a very large drop-off rate here by, whatever. Ubers and taxis and parents. So that's what the community is concerned about, rightfully, because these neighborhoods have a lot of drop-off issues, right?
Don't they have a school adjacent right now on their
On
space?
yeah, on 97th
So what
Street.
is the utilization of that?
Well, that's the question. So right? So they should use the utilization on 97th for us to understand how it's handled. They said right now that they have this operation where they make sure the cars move along and all that stuff. But they actually need to comment on how that's going to be managed here and why they think people are only going to drop off on 97th doesn't really make sense. People coming from the west will drop off on 98th and from the east on 97th.
Not necessarily.
No?
No, because I believe you just make a right turn on Lexington, a right turn on 97th, and then you're going west.
So it has to do with coming across the park? Or no?
No, because then you're coming from 96th, right? If you're
Right.
coming across the park, you're coming. But I think that if you designate 97th Street to be your main entrance, then I don't think it's that difficult for the hired cars to find their way, regardless of whether they're coming from the west, the north, the south, or the east, they're just going to circle around the block. Now, then, if you have the question as to, do we really want all these cars circulating on side streets to access it, that's another
Right.
issue. But as to the difficulty, what is it, an extra 30 seconds driving
Right.
around? That's not going to make an issue for the parents or for the hired car drivers.
But that's the thing I'm not really getting is you have this huge lobby that goes all the way through, front to back. If you were saying that 97th Street's your main entrance, then why would you have this continuous lobby band that goes from 98th to 97th, right? You would fill that up with function space, right? Make your Fab Lab bigger or whatever, and then have a secondary entrance that's visually secondary. But here, it looks like that's the main entrance for the gym, that's the main entrance for the theater, that, I think, I don't know. There isn't any hierarchy in the building design. So you can't actually, I can't figure out from the design how they come to the conclusion.
Maybe they're assuming it because the existing building is on 97, and that's why I'm going back to the question. But people are used to dropping off on 97 because
Right.
of the existing building, and they will continue to practice that same pattern. And that's the only.
But then kids graduate and the next
Right.
group of parents has
The other thing is,
no
I think there is
habits.
a block away from it, there is the MTA bus garage. And I don't know whether that has any in terms of the traffic movement that slows down the traffic on that street, and maybe people by default pick the other street as a traveling route because of the bus. I'm just
Yeah.
No, but I
questioning
mean, then I guess I do understand the chair's point, then why have an elaborate 98th Street entrance as well? Why not just cut the lobby to nothing, have the lobby end,
agree
except
with
for
that.
maybe some emergency egress
Have a
onto
minor
98th?
lobby, not a
Yeah,
major
and
lobby.
just expand something else, or place some administrative offices there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good.
And there's all these offices in the cellar also. It just goes on, the offices. I mean, I just don't get it. Because to have a building envelope and then fill it up with stuff, it just makes it an expensive project. Why do you want to build more floor area than you really need for your school? Especially because it's not adaptable floor area. And one of my comments also was, the real problem is that the building is not suited to having windowed classrooms. And we've seen in some really good solutions where they do courtyard buildings. There's actually a school downtown that are sort of two buildings facing each other with like 30 feet or 40 feet in between. And that creates great interior classrooms with light, with access to the outside that's private for the kids. And it seems like that's what this through lot really needs, because it's just not getting good advantage of windowed classrooms, And yeah, and it's just and then that was, my other question was, there's so much circulation space. And there was, one of the submissions was, yes, but we need circulation space because it's great hangout space. Every one of the photographs that they showed of great hangout space is near a window. And none of these corridors, or very few of them, have that kind of alluring lay-by hangout area. They just look like corridors. And so, I'm not, and I know that these are still schematic drawings and they're going to work them out further and further, but you can't create windows where you don't have windows. So you don't have an exterior wall, right? So I think actually the project needs more work to be right for the school. But it's at least, we no longer have to get over the hurdle that there's a waiver requested for a residential building. And then ACARE submitted its response on November 27th to DEP's comments on air quality, so we still need a response on that. But I didn't see ACARE make the corrections on the hazmat materials. They didn't do that yet. Also, so that was my question, DEP needs to now review the revised building, but I don't know if this is the final shape, so maybe we should hold off on that. And we had asked for a pedestrian analysis. I don't know whether we received that. I didn't see that anywhere. And we also did get DOT school safety sign off, but they always request a follow-up on that once the school is operational. Did you have other?
I just to add to the programming, as I was looking at the school, the classroom utilization, I think of the 10 classrooms, 6 of them were proposed to be utilized at 63%. So, which is a pretty low number if the demand is high. So I would like a clarification.
I also had some programmatic needs questions. All of the classrooms have 18 children slotted into them regardless of size. So as a result, you have some classrooms with 18 square feet per student and others with 45 square feet per student. And these are just your general classrooms, not your specialty classrooms. So why the variation, and can some of those classrooms be made smaller? And then I also had a similar question to Vice Chair about the utilization rate, because you do have some of the upper middle school classrooms in the 50 to 65% usage rate, and also some lower middle school classrooms. And this is after the expansion. So the question is, are they foreseeing in the future accepting more students, or are they keeping the space just in case they add more programs?
I just wondered
Yeah, just a second, right? Sorry?
about Seeker, going back to
Can
Seeker.
you speak up? I don't know if you can speak up.
Going back to Seeker, so we received a Phase 2 work plan that was revised, but we need the Phase 2 testing result.
But did these DEP sign off on the Phase 2 work plan?
Yes.
They did, okay. Okay. Okay, next.
Item number 23, 2016-4271BZ, 201 Hampton Avenue, Brooklyn.
Yeah, the applicant requested an adjournment for a very sad reason, and I just wanted to extend my condolences and the board's condolences to Mr. Moser's family, the architect who unfortunately passed away.
Jesus.
So it's very sad, and I'm sorry.
Mr. Moser.
Item number 24, 2017-102BZ, 2015 East Fifth Street, Brooklyn.
Okay. We had a retention of existing building material threshold question that needed to be resolved. The existing side yard widths are now not proposed to be modified. That's a good way to retain an existing building. The floor plans and demolition plans show clearly what is being retained, whereas the floor area drawings don't do as well with that, and I really thought that the demolition drawings were super clear in explaining, and I'm going to actually recommend that that be our standard. Calculations are provided on the floor plans and demo plans, and just a note that unless extremely close to meeting the 50% minimum perimeter wall, we do not allow interior walls to count towards the calculations. But I think in this project, they established they meet the threshold because they're actually higher, even higher than the minimum. Let's see, there's a note on the drawing that says existing front yard to remain, which I think is a mistake. I think it just needs to be removed. But the dimension for it is 15 feet, and the existing front wall that is 13 foot 5 inches from the front lot line is shown as dashed. So that means they're taking out that front wall, so that note's
Right, and in the
incorrect.
statement of fact, they do indicate that they're making the front yard compliant, so that needs to be changed.
Yeah, okay.
Move on.
No. The drawings clarify also that the dormers are permitted obstructions. That's something that we asked them to do at the last hearing. And the floor area went down slightly to 1.1 FAR, 4582 square feet from 4844 square feet, and 1.22 FAR, which is more in line with other buildings on the block, and we discussed that, so I think it's an improvement. Everybody else okay?
Yep. Item number 25, 2017-190BZ, 2311 31st Road, Queens.
They requested an adjournment.
New cases, item number 1, 2016-4468BZ, 27 East 61st Street, Manhattan.
Okay. We have proof of service of initial application to officials and proof of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board 8 recommends approval. With respect to the A finding, well, I do see that this is a very narrow lot and that only 4 other lots within 1,000 feet are similarly sized. I'm not sure that I completely buy the commercial character of this block argument, since there are residential uses on the block and other similar locations with private homes. However, I do agree that being on a block adjacent to townhomes is more desirable than being on a block with a commercial character. It does have commercial uses on the block. With respect to the layout, the other narrow homes must have similar front-back split arrangements, so I don't see why this one is different. For instance, the houses on Madison, where there's residential above, the windows are in the front and the back. All townhouses have front-back split arrangements. So that doesn't make any sense unless you lay it out in a very inefficient way like these are. I actually think the more persuasive argument for this is that the narrow width impedes proper independent access to the upper residential unit, but the 2 Madison Avenue locations actually suffer from the same condition. So again, why is this different? And those, how do they deal with it? I think how they deal with it is they have very narrow access to the upper floors, which may not be permitted anymore. And also in renovating the existing building, I'm wondering whether in a certain way they created their own difficulty, because it might have subjected the building to new egress requirements that were not a factor previously, because you could sneak up a skinny little stair and get to the upstairs. With respect to the as-of-right residential townhouse, I wasn't convinced that the stair elevator core as shown would be required, or that a house would be laid out that way with little rooms front and back, because that's never how you see townhouses laid out. And skylights in this case would satisfy light and air requirements at the first floor extension. So in particular, because those usually don't need to be living rooms, they can be rec rooms and other things. So you would never in reality demolish your rear yard extension. You'd put your garden on top of it, and you would have a great extended activity space, whatever you want to call it, but I actually think that the skylights qualify for light and air in that case. And then just a brief little bit on the cost estimates. The demolition costs for the as-of-right number 2 mixed use and as-of-right number 3 townhouse are the same. How could that be if the townhouse proposal removes the rear yard extension? Also, there's much more new exterior construction for the mixed-use building than for the townhouse, and I didn't see how that's reflected in the costs, which are only $30,000 apart. It's like they need fat footings, they need all this exterior masonry walls, and also what's the $254,000 for excavation foundation appearing in both scenarios? Why do you need a foundation in the residential where you're proposing to remove that rear yard extension? I don't know.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
So they both have excavation foundation, both the as-of-right townhouse and the mixed-use building have a cost of $254,000 for excavation foundation. So I get why they have foundation costs, whether that's the right number, I don't know, for the proposed, because they're going to be extending that, right? But if you're removing the rear extension and you're cutting back the building to allow the 30-foot rear yard, which you already have, what are the foundation costs? And if there are any, I don't know what they are, why would it be the same? Right? So, and also, why would the storefronts be 2 times the cost in the townhouse versus the mixed use, or the facade be more expensive for the townhouse than the mixed use? And I didn't want to bore everybody by going line by line, but I can do the same line by line in the cost estimates. It actually doesn't make any sense. So this proposed mixed use is like an anchor or a feature store, right? It's going to be a single user. So that means they want to spend some significant money to have an attractive facade. And a townhouse has sort of different kinds of demands of the facade, right? So you don't need to have as much window wall, there's like in fact, you don't want as much window wall. So I don't see how you can make them the same. And then same comments in terms of the cost analysis, townhouse versus proposed. And also, why is there no finished carpentry or wood flooring in the proposed? So it seemed to me when I was reviewing these costs, like the numbers weren't quite working, so we drop out a line item and nobody will notice that we don't have a floor or we don't have finished carpentry. And I'm like, how did they get the sheetrock on the walls without finished carpentry? And so, I don't know. So, and then we also have air quality and LPC sign-offs, but I think we're otherwise clear with the seeker review on this, right? It's a simple seeker review.
So, some of the questions you have raised, my first question, and this I would like Commissioner Otley Brown to clarify that, why in the financial analysis are we assuming a pre-enlarged building when already the building has been built to the DOB approved plan? So why are we considering a demolition of the DOB approved plan to consider the pre-enlarged plan as one of the financial alternatives? So that's a question I have. I would like Commissioner Otley Brown to clarify that. And that leads to the other question, is that the DOB approved plan and the as of right one, alternate one, is the same. And in the DOB approved plan, it does show a staircase that leads, it's kind of a little strange. It's like a 5-flight of stairs that leads up to the stairs, and there's also an elevator core that is also accessing the residential units. But to get to the elevator core, you have to go through the retail space. So my question was that that's not a very practical layout when DOB approved it, and was that actually an accessory residential space to the retail, which actually is, because it would then count towards commercial floor area, it was built as a residential floor area with a separate entrance, but it also had the elevator access. So just a question I'm throwing out there.
But the DOB approved and the as of right one are not the same. The DOB approved is only 5 stories plus a cellar. The as of right number 1 is a 6-story plus cellar.
Well, I think that's the confusion with the way that's
the designation of the floors. Because they have a basement.
Oh, okay,
They
so
call
the
it a
DOB
basement.
approved is 5 stories, a cellar, and a basement, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that there's a confusion with the way
I thought
the
it was only
numbers are.
5
It's the same.
stories.
It's this. So I think those are my 2 main comments, and I really would. I actually did not have an issue with the uniqueness. The block is very commercial in that way. My only concern was the extension in the rear, and I couldn't quite verify it from the rear how it is affecting the residential building. And the statement of fact mentioned all the buildings on that block except the building 681 Madison Avenue, which is a residential building that kind of hems around the site with all the residential windows around it. So just from a neighborhood character and all those kind of analysis, it needs to discuss that 681 Madison Avenue in detail and how this extension, additional extension on the above, on the 2 floors above are not going to have an impact. So that needs to be fleshed out also very clearly.
So I also had a question as to why they were analyzing the as-existing pre-enlargement as their as-of-right that they use as their kind of starting jump-off place in terms of feasibility when they already have approved plans that are as of right. So to me, that kind of then changes it. So now this has to be the baseline point that you have to prove is not feasible, not the previous building that's smaller. So I think that's really an important point to make. They have to kind of redo the financials so that that's the as of right that they have to show is not feasible. And then you can build upon that and then look at what a minimal variance is. And then that being said, I had one other question about the plans, and then I'll launch into my financial questions. The question I had with the plans had to do with the apartment in each scenario, which goes from being a 3-bedroom apartment in the approved plans and then shifts to a 2-bedroom apartment in the as of right. And I don't understand why, because it's the same size apartment, basically. In fact, in the as of right, it's larger by a couple of feet. It's longer. And so if anything, it should also be able to be considered a 3-bedroom apartment, or in the approved plans, it should be a 2-bedroom apartment. And this should be a larger 2-bedroom apartment, but it should be the same. And there is a difference in terms of the rent that each apartment actually is assumed to get. So that's why I think it has to be, the apartments have to be made the same in both scenarios. I have questions on the financials, starting with the site value. While the max FAR is 10, the site is valued to a 10.0 FAR, it should be capped as to what is allowed as of right regarding the sliver law, just like the financials on West 19th Street is, because that's really is all you could have as of right. So that has to be changed. They actually, what's interesting here, though, is that they are actually valuing the site as if it's vacant land, based on vacant land sale comparables, and then a depreciated building. But I'm not sure if that is a valid way to value this site, simply because this is not a situation where the building is depreciated anymore. It's now a building that's undergone substantial renovation on its way to its as of right. And so therefore, you might want to consider valuing this based on building sales of similar types of buildings, because I'm thinking doing it the other way, you might be overvaluing it. I'm not sure. I'd like to see it done both ways. As to the land sale comparable, sale number 3 is a variance site that was granted a variance and then sold in 2015. So I think that should be removed, because that is a variance site. And so that's adding more value onto the property than necessary. I found that the retail rents were problematic. I felt that it was very confusing to judge whether or not the adjustments are actually making sense, because the square footages were not listed for the leases that were involved, and the calculations explaining how they got to the lease rate per square foot for the space of each comparable wasn't clarified either. Also, the adjustments seem the same across the board for some criteria, even though the subject fares better compared to some of the comparables than in other criteria. Now, I think they also need to clarify in a narrative certain parts of the analysis in terms of listing the square footage attributed to the comps and the calculations that led to the assumptions for the multi-floor comps, and also explaining why the comparables, regardless of floor size or location, which are used to value different floors in different scenarios, yet have a 10% adjustment down for utility because of the constrained floor plates of the subject due to the second egress. However, in some of the situations, the egress isn't as constrained as others, and so that's why I would like a narrative to tie it in. Also, some of the comparables are just as constrained as the subject because they are narrow, yet there are still adjustments down. So that's why I want them to just take me through the analysis. Let me see. Okay, so the townhouse, I had a question about the as of right 2, which is the townhouse. It assumes a full lot coverage cellar, but I'm not sure that's necessary as storage in such a large home. So that's driving some of the costs for that townhouse, and so I just wanted to wonder why. Is there a full-size cellar right now? And it's just a question, that's what I
Well, it's
figured.
built
We don't
now.
know.
It is
It's
built.
been
out.
built.
It
We
has
don't-
been built by DOB approved plan. It has been built.
It
to the-
has been built already,
Yeah.
so then it's just a question of them just filling it with something. Okay, all right, that's what I wanted to know. As for the residential rents, both the existing and the as-of-right have similar laid-out apartments with the same amount of rooms, so why are they valued differently, which is what I raised before. One is a 3-bedroom and one is a 2-bedroom. Then, as for the 2-bedroom comparables, this is based on 2-bedroom simplex apartments that don't have significant outdoor space, but the as-of-right is a duplex apartment, and I think duplex apartments are definitely more valuable than simplex apartments, and certainly apartments with outdoor space are more valuable than apartments without outdoor space. So now the townhouse sales, I feel like they might be undervalued. The townhouse sales suggest a value of 10,647,000 square feet. And if the site value, which has a smaller townhouse, is estimated to sell for 10,300, then this new townhouse scenario, which is much larger and in new condition, possibly should sell for more, I would think. As for the comparables are all located further away from Central Park. They're east of Lexington Avenue, which are lesser locations, yet only 2 of them have locational adjustments. They're all on comparable lot sizes. They all have less home floor area. They're adjusted upwards by only 10 to 15% to account for having less floor area. But the larger townhouses, when you look at the analysis, actually sell for upwards of $12 million. So I would like them to get larger townhomes to get rid of the size adjustment issue, to see whether or not they actually would suggest that this townhouse scenario would actually sell for more. And they really need to get townhouse comparables that actually have elevators too, because I think that makes a big difference. And that's it. That's all I have right now.
Okay.
Yep, I have some comments regarding the cost. First of all, my understanding is that the existing conditions, they have the restaurant, which is kind of like a cellar, and then they have a basement, existing basement, which is the kitchen. And in all of the 3 schemes, the proposed and the 2 as-of-rights, I believe they are extending the basement portion all the way to the property line. So maybe that's why the excavation part and the foundation part exists in all of the 3 financials.
So, but in the existing, there's that extension that goes all the way to the rear, the
Yeah.
1-story extension. So why do they need to extend that? Isn't the extension already in place on the existing
The extension
condition?
is in place, but it's at the top like that. But I believe what they are proposing in the 3 schemes, they are talking about extending.
Oh, extending the
that-
cellar,
Yeah.
digging the
So
cellar.
maybe that's why the
It's
excavation
not
and
the
the foundation
basement,
part.
it's the cellar they're extending.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'm looking at the approved plan. The approved plan, the cellar and basement and first floor are
All the same.
All to the lot line. So
According to that, it's,
according to the approved plan, if it has been built to it, the cellar is built to the lot line, so is the basement, so is the first floor, so is the second, third, the setback is on the 4th and the 5th floor.
okay, so the cellar is already extended
Extended.
under the approved
Which we don't
plans.
know if it has been built to that, but as per the DOB approved plan, it's meant to be all the way to the lot line.
But if you look at the existing conditions, there is a set of periods called existing plans.
Yes.
For these existing plans, it shows that
You
we
are
have
right,
2
you are
below
right.
grade levels.
The building prior to the DOB approval, that was the condition.
Yes.
Okay.
So the issue is, can they include in their costs, the cost to extend the cellar, or do we look at the enlarged approved buildings as the baseline, therefore no costs associated with extending the cellar?
That's what I think they should
Yeah.
do, because it's an
already good.
as-of-right scenario. They have plans for it.
You're not going to undo the digging of the cellar and
So they already put it, you're saying? So the existing plans are not really existing? That what is
Right.
existing right now
Is the
is they
DOB.
have the two levels all the way to the property line?
Well, we don't know, but we know construction started and then stopped at a point. but
The
we don't-
construction has been built to the DOB-approved plan from exterior. It has been built
It's framed out.
completely, all the windows are in, all the walls are in,
Ah.
it's all in.
So it means the excavation
to,
already took place.
Right. So that's why I think that should be the new starting point.
Okay.
That's the issue. And why doesn't it work? And I have to say that we've had cases where we've had new plans and construction beginning and then being told that it isn't feasible. And we've had issues with that because having approved plans kind of suggests, and beginning construction suggests that somebody somewhere bankrolled that as a
Yes,
feasible project.
we did have a
Yes.
recent version of that story.
And so now to say it's no longer feasible, that's, you're going to have to really talk about that
Yeah.
and why.
Okay.
Okay, however, if they're gonna include these kind of line items in the cost, I have looked at the excavation support. I believe they don't, if the adjacent buildings, they have cellars or subcellars, I believe they are not gonna need any excavation support. They are accounting for about 130 grand for sheet piling. Again, this is not gonna be needed if the adjacent buildings have cellars that match in elevation with the proposed or with the existing. The second line item I looked at is the excavation. Also, I looked at the foundation walls, the quantities for the foundation walls. The metal decking, according to what they are doing, they are adding an area, 7 floors of an area, which is about 35 by 15. If we just add up 35 by 15, get the square footage, multiply this by 7, this is about 3,500 square footage of metal decking. They are considering about 11,000 square feet of metal decking. This is way too much, more than what the square footage of the actually proposed is. So I believe we need to get some sort of like more details for the quantity estimate for the numbers that they are considering for the cost right now.
But to go back to this point, this is strange. Okay, if the building is already built and the metal decking is already in place and the excavation at the cellar already took place and the extension at the rear already took place and all that stuff, and we don't have photographs to show that the work was finished because they say, the work is in this sort of stopped state, right? But then why are we looking at the costs of doing that work?
Yeah, that's
If
correct.
that's the
If it's
existing-
there, it's there. They should
Right.
start from, the reference point should be whatever existing today.
Right,
I'm not sure
right.
about the existing, because right now, I have a set of plans saying existing plans. So I'm treating these plans
Right.
as they are the actual conditions on site.
Right, but it's not, it's the
It's not.
as they say, the pre-enlargement
The
plan.
rendering that we have on file and what I saw on the side, at least the front facade is the same.
Right.
And the back matches exactly what DOB has approved.
But you couldn't see the back.
I saw it from Madison, from, what is it?
Oh, you could
Park
see it
Avenue
peeking over
through that hotel building.
Ah,
There's a little bit of a
okay.
gap, so you can see that the 2 floors above is set back above the commercial space. That's the extent I could see.
Okay. Okay. So we have some sort of initial start issues. How to look at this. Okay. Anybody else? Anything left? Okay.
Item number 2, 2017-297, excuse me, BZ 19 Stanton Road, Brooklyn. This is the Build It Back project.
So these are Build It Back projects, and we're asked to waive our rules of practice and procedure. And this one is another one of those applications for a waiver of all the yard requirements for the Sheep's Head Bay Courts, where the houses don't front on a map street, so there's no, none of the lot lines are meeting the zoning resolution definitions of side, front, rear. And this site was the subject of a GCL waiver, GCL 36 waiver last year. And the floor plate is much reduced compared to the existing building, which has a result of increasing open areas at the front, rear, and sides of the house.
Item number 3, 2017-302BZ, 174A and 176A Beach, 111th Street, Queens.
Okay, another build-it-back application where, again, in coordination with HPD, we are asked to waive rules of practice and procedure to facilitate prosecution of the application. And this application is to replace actually 6 one-family bungalows with 2 prefabricated units. They call them modular units that are 2-family detached homes on this one zoning lot. And the request is to waive the 45-foot minimum distance between buildings on a zoning lot, where 11-foot 10 inches is proposed instead, and otherwise it complies with the zoning regulations. And just a note that in the R4, had this been on 2 separate zoning lots, the minimum yard requirement would be 5 feet on either side, so this actually exceeds it. So, it's 8 feet on one and 5 feet on another, so this could actually be 10 feet apart if they simply subdivided the zoning lot. Not sure why they didn't just go do that, but anyway. Okay.
Just to note that these 2 cases will be heard first in the morning.
Okay.
Yeah. This concludes the public hearing for, the public review session for December 4th, 2017.
Thank you, everyone.